The biggest thing in terms of product development is learning about the consumers, knowing what the market wants. I think it's a disservice to the category to launch products just to launch fast and flood the market.
Hey guys, I'm here with Seng Robertson and we are live from the South San Francisco Conference Center at the International Bulk Wine and Spirits Show. Seng, thanks for joining me here.
Thank you.
So folks, Seng is a technical director at the Boston Beer Company and especially in the cannabis division. So her job is to really do product development, and we're going to deep dive into how drinks industry, let's say alcohol industry, can use their infrastructure and what they can use, to tailor into cannabis market. Apart from that, entrepreneurs trying to find out on how product development works, where to start. We're going to have that as well covered here. So Seng, why don't you give us a little bit of context about your journey and how you started and how you ended up in Boston in cannabis now?
Yeah, so in 2018, I joined the cannabis industry, and I was very excited for the Cannabis 2.0, which was the edibles and the beverages, because that's the way I wanted to consume beverages. So in 2018, I joined High Park, which was the recreational arm of Tilray, and shortly after, I joined the joint venture of Tilray and InBev. And they formed an organization called Fluent, and we launched cannabis-infused RTDs, cannabis-infused dry tea, and cannabis-infused drink dissolved powders. So different formats there for the consumers.
Fantastic. Let's go on what wineries, breweries, and distilleries can do in cannabis and what you think is a myth out there which they just cannot do.
Well, really speaking at this conference, what I've heard questions about is, can we infuse cannabis into an alcoholic beverage? The regulations say no. It has to be a non-alc wine, beer, or spirits. So that's a misconception that I've been hearing here. So it's good to educate, those who are interested in developing cannabis-infused beer, wine, or spirits.
Got it. What about, let's say, someone's winery is making a non-alcoholic wine, but obviously, can they in their facility add CBD? No, right? Like they will have to have physical another lease or something, or what are the laws there?
Right. So a lot of regulations in different states will say that you have to produce that beverage in a dedicated cannabis beverage facility. So where you produce your alcoholic beverages now, likely you're not going to be able to produce your cannabis beverage. So you're going to need a dedicated cannabis facility.
And can that be literally like another room in the winery?
Generally not. It needs to be a standalone facility, and dedicated equipment. So,
but it's okay to have it on the vineyard, let's say, or it has to be completely different.
No, you can have it in the same geographical space.
Okay.
It just needs to be, you have a lot of, regulations require certain security, certain dedicated equipment. But definitely it could be in the same geographical space.
And what about the supply and distribution of that? Like, can you store cannabis beverages together with wines, or it has to be, again, everything separate till the truck also separate, right?
Right. And the distribution is definitely different. So you're going to have to store it differently. It's going to be distributed differently. And, really the end consumer is going to purchase it in a different,
But legally they can store together in their facilities?
No, it would have to be separate.
Got it.
That's some of the complexity there. And, it's just a safety features that the regulations have put in place.
I think here's a perfect example. You're Boston Beer Company and you're leveraging and you're getting started with cannabis, and obviously you have a long vision. That's why big companies are getting involved. How and what are you doing? How have you started this division, and what is the role it's playing with your main beer business?
Right. So technically, I'm with BBCCC Inc., which is a subsidiary of the Boston Beer Company that operates just in Canada. So our first brand has launched. So we're launched Teapot, so which is a cannabis infused tea. So we're excited about that, but no beverages are off the table. But that's kind of our first foray into the cannabis category is with Teapot.
So it's a separate office, or you can work in the main with other folks as well?
Right. We work closely with the Boston Beer team to develop the product for sure. But in terms of actively working on cannabis beverages, it's
Completely
based
separate.
in Canada.
And that office just has cannabis stuff?
Yes.
Got it. Let's go into product development, Seng, where your super strength is.
Yeah.
Walk us over, if I was an entrepreneur and I just came to you as a friend and say, hey, Seng, let's do cannabis beverage. I think we can crack this. What are the few questions you would ask me that, okay, here are the 10 things I need to know?
For sure. I would say one of the main things is making sure you have the expertise, either knowing the expertise or having a team that has the expertise. There's a lot of quality. Again, you're making a food product, so you need that food science background. You need to know the regulations, and really having that experience of developing a great tasting cannabis beverage. So anyone can throw ingredients together and call it a beverage, but to make it taste great tasting, you're going to need the expertise there.
Got it.
Really on the flavor work, and that's really what the category needs to grow, is having great tasting beverages. And that's where you do need that expertise of product development and quality in manufacturing all together.
Fair enough. Where do you start? Like, okay, what kind of recipes you want to do, what kind of flavor profiles you want to play with, who is your consumers. So what are the questions your research team would ask the business team?
Right. I would say it starts with, before you even get into the development of the beverage, you need to design the beverage. And that's where, you have to look at, is this desirable? Is this, feasible? And is it economically viable? So even before you get into, developing the beverage, you really got to make sure that you hit all those 3 points in the design phase and then move over to developing. And then for developing, there's a lot to consider: the technology to infuse the cannabis into the beverage. The liquid has to be great tasting. And really the packaging. The packaging is very important. So those are things you need to think about when you're developing a cannabis beverage.
Fair enough. And once you have a test product, what do you do with that? Like, what kind of data are you trying to collect? What's your test consumer lot look like? Just give us more on, that phase before actually it hits, the ground.
Before it hits the ground, you want to make sure you hit the 3 S's. So that's safety, making sure that the product is safe to consume. So, it doesn't have alcohol. So there's, microbial considerations, but and chemical contaminants, and making sure that it meets the regulatory requirements. So safety, it's product, consumers will consume. So you want to make sure it's safe for them. So safety is one. Stability, you want to make sure that throughout shelf life that the potency is going to meet the label claim throughout shelf life, and it's still going to taste great throughout shelf life. And then the final one is sensory, making sure that you run sensory panels, making sure you benchmark against not just cannabis products, but all products that are out there in the market, and making sure that, it's a great tasting beverage that consumers will enjoy. I think that's so important, the sensory aspect of the beverage before you launch, testing that, benchmarking that with other products. It's very important.
A lot of data to be collected there, right?
Yes, definitely.
So what is the time, like, let's say you say, the first were like the shelf and so on, right? So you put it on the shelves and then you go after 6 months or 1 month, or what are the time frames you want to collect this data back?
For sure. We collect data before we launch, and we collect data after we launch. And we just want to make sure that, it is stable. And in Canada, if you're not going to put a best before date, it has to be at least stable for 90 days. But of course, to get through the distribution, you want to be stable for a lot longer than 90 days.
Got it. So literally, your testing would take almost 6 months at least.
At least, yes. You want to make sure to do it right. You can definitely launch product out there and take that risk, but definitely if you want to do it right, you're not going to be first to market. So,
Yep.
Yeah.
What are just last question, Seng here? What are some of the things that you've learned that you would not sort of repeat because it was a great learning experience, and that can be a great tip for other product development people in cannabis?
Yeah, I would say, there was a lot of learnings in the cannabis industry because it is a new category. But I would say taking the time and not necessarily being first to market, but making sure that there's always the stress of hitting that launch timeline, right? And there's always that pressure of hitting a launch timeline. But if it's not the right product, going back and saying, you know what, we want to make sure that this is the absolutely perfect product that we want to launch, and waiting until that moment. If we have to maybe launch a month later to hit that, to make sure that the consumers are getting the best tasting products that's stable, that month is worth it. So that's a big learning that, I think
Instead of a lot of things getting backfired, you've learned that it's better to go slow but get the right thing out.
Exactly. Yeah. Making sure it's the right product for the consumer.
Fair enough. Any places where people can learn more about product development in cannabis? Any books or any blogs or podcasts you could recommend?
Yeah, there's a lot of cannabis podcasts. I listen to them quite frequently. The biggest thing in terms of product development is learning about the consumers, knowing what the market wants. I think it's a disservice to the category to launch products just to launch fast and flood the market. So really learning about product development and really knowing your consumers is where I would say looking at the insights, if you have a concept, testing out with consumer panels, that type of work I think is very necessary to make sure we're not flooding the markets with just any products that are out there.